And with the release of the animation Batman the Caped Crusader approaching very soon, we fans cannot wait anymore for the promise that this animation will be a spiritual follow-up to Batman the Animated Series, but with a much more dark and adult tone to its stories. That being said, Bruce Timm, that was one of the producers of Batman the Animated Series in the 90s, is also the producer of this series, and here he will have the possibility of exploring a much more darker side to Batman that he always wanted to do since that time in Batman the Animated Series, but the ratings wouldn't let him do it. But what were those things or episodes that couldn't be explored in Batman the Animated Series? What stories not only Bruce Timm but Paul Dini and the other producers couldn't put on the screen and only got on the script page, or sometimes not even that? So let's talk a little about some of these ideas and some of these unmade episodes. Batman the Animated Series is very famous for portraying the world of Gotham City and Batman in a unique way that was never approached before. But it didn't explore the universe outside Gotham City and the other characters from the DC universe. That only came with Superman the Animated Series some years later, with crossovers with characters like Aquaman, The Flash, and even Batman. But there were some plans for characters of the DC lore to be used already in Batman the Animated Series. One of them was none other than Swamp Thing. That's right, supposedly there was an idea for an episode that would feature the Swamp Thing in Gotham City, and he was going to be used or controlled by Poison Ivy to do some bad deeds for her, especially kill Batman. But I believe this idea only stayed in the concept stage and never was written on paper. And it was only featured again in animation form many years later in the cartoon Justice League Action, where Paul Dini was able to write an episode called Garden of Evil. And there we have Poison Ivy controlling Swamp Thing to do the bad deeds for her, and the Justice League had to intervene. I think it would have been awesome to see Swamp Thing in Batman the Animated Series already, because he's a character that I love very much. I love monsters in the DC universe. I particularly think that I would love to see a clash between Swamp Thing and Clayface. Imagine how cool would that be? But apparently the producers didn't have the rights of Swamp Thing at the time to use him. In fact, I believe some of these ideas for this episode were used in another episode of the animated series called House and Garden, which has Poison Ivy creating a family for herself where her kids become these huge monsters of plants. But even though the character wasn't used in the series itself, he appeared in the chronology of Batman the Animated Series universe in the long feature Batman and Harley Quinn, which is in fact a sequel to the Batman the Animated Series with a story of Harley Quinn that has Poison Ivy and the appearance of Swamp Thing. So at the end of the day, the character showed up in the BTAS universe. Another dark DC character that would show up in an episode was none other than Sandman, the god of dreams. Apparently Neil Gaiman and Paul Dini, or the producers of Batman the Animated Series, were talking about the idea of including the character in one of the episodes of the series, and that would be amazing. Apparently the plot would feature Batman facing all the villains of the show, Joker, Penguin, Riddler, everybody, and they would all attack him at the same time, putting the Bat in a very extreme situation where he would almost die. And in this moment between life and death, he would meet Death, the sister of Sandman, that would consider the idea of taking his soul. But then Sandman would appear and intervene to tell her the story of Batman and why he is important for the dreams of the people in Gotham City and the nightmare of the villains, and would eventually stop her from taking his soul, keeping Batman alive for more days of battle. That's a great concept for an episode, extremely metaphysical and kind of beautiful actually. Sometimes this is the kind of story that I like to see Batman featured on, but that was exactly the problem that prevented the studio from moving on with this idea. The whole thing was too metaphysical and it lacked action, which was something that was important for the show. And I agree with that, but I would love the episode and I think it would be one of the most adult in the series that indeed had some very adult episodes, if you remember. And even though this story was never featured in any animation or comic books eventually, Paul Dini actually mentioned this story in his book, Dark Knight, a true Batman story that has some tragic and dark histories about the writer himself and his life writing for the character Batman. And in this book you can find some pages with the comic book story that he imagined for the episode. It's very beautiful and dark. Something that could actually be done now in Batman the Caped Crusader, with time, of course, in the next seasons maybe. But Batman the Animated Series is a show that for me is almost complete in its nature for featuring the best foes of Batman from the most popular to the least popular or the most unused. And one of these unused characters in the series that could have been used more is Hugo Strange, in the episode The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne that I have already commented here in the channel. You can watch it in my playlist with Batman the Animated Series episodes commentaries. And usually Hugo Strange is a character that plays with the mind of the Bat, and in that episode, even though it's a great episode, he was kinda poorly used because the focus were in the other three main villains, Joker, Penguin, and Two-Face. But originally there was an idea to a return of Hugo Strange to the show in an episode called Mind Games. A very appropriate title, by the way. And this episode has a script that was fully written for the show. In fact, you can find it in the internet if you look for it. I already read it, and it's a very interesting and strange script because it starts with you thinking, am I really reading an episode of Batman the Animated Series? Because it starts with Batman and Robin not knowing who they really are. In fact, not remembering that they are Batman and Robin. So the episode starts with this idea of amnesia in the characters. In fact, little by little, they start to discover things about their secret identities, like they discover the Batcave, they discover the Batmobile and the vehicles, and all seems very strange for them in the beginning until they actually are forced to dress as Batman and Robin and go out on the streets to fight crime. But the episode takes a little turn to a comedic tone because we see Batman driving the Batmobile and hitting or crashing the vehicle on the streets. They don't really know how to use the grapple guns. It's very funny until the plot takes them to discovering that the whole thing was a plan of Hugo Strange that lobotomized both. It's an interesting episode, and I think many shows, even live action, always have this kind of episode of amnesia in the characters because it takes them in an interesting journey of rediscover who they are. But even though the episode was never produced and Hugo Strange never returned to the series, this plot was kinda used in another Batman show that I really love called The Batman, the one from 2004, in an episode called A Dark Knight to Remember. The episode doesn't have Hugo Strange as the villain, it has the Penguin actually, but it has a similar plot with Batman losing his memory and having to slowly rediscover the things about his life, the Batcave, the vehicles, all these things, being helped by Alfred and Batgirl, who is the first sidekick of the character in that show. It's a cool episode and I like it very much, so there you go. And speaking about sidekicks, there was an unproduced script featuring Robin as the main character in one of the episodes. And the episode would be called The Midnight Hour. And it would probably be the first episode in Batman the Animated Series that would feature only Robin as a character in the story. Because even though he has the two-parter Robin's Reckoning in the show, the episode doesn't have only him, it also features Batman very prominently. So the plot of The Midnight Hour would have only Robin because Batman would be missing during the story. In fact, he would have to investigate Batman's disappearance and had to follow many clues, including go to the Arkham Asylum by himself and speaking with the Joker. I also read the script and it's a cool idea. I don't know if it would be a great episode, but it would be different for having Robin as this prominent character. And at the end of the episode, I'm sorry, it's spoilers from an episode that never happened, so whatever. Robin would find out that Batman was captured by a crime boss that was auctioning Batman to some of the other crime bosses to be killed. So then he would free the Dark Knight, and at the end of the episode, we would have this very cool dialogue where Batman would say that he trusted that Robin would find him eventually, so he never got nervous during the whole thing. Speaking about Robin, there were some ideas about creating a spin-off series with the character as the main protagonist. Way in the beginning of the show, I believe it was something that Warner Bros. Wanted to appeal to the younger audience, especially the kids, right? But that idea never came to fruition. In fact, I think Robin was only the protagonist when it came the Teen Titans show. It was also considered the idea of creating a Catwoman spin-off show, and that got a little further into production because Paul Dini or Bruce Timm even did sketches with the character with a design that would be featured in this series. In fact, it would be a much more dark version. She would dress totally in black. I believe it was something more inspired in the Catwoman's look of Batman Returns, which is very cool. But eventually the Catwoman would dress totally in black in the second part of the show, Batman, the new animated series. And the character would never get her own show, indeed. But I saved the two most legendary Unmade episodes for the end. And the first one is one that most people know, I mean most fans of the show know, that never happened. That would be an episode featuring a gun, but not only a gun. The gun who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, in an episode called The One and Only Gun Story. And this would be one of the edgiest, most unbelievable plots that would be featured in this animation, because it almost didn't have anything to do with the adventures of Batman. It would be a very unique and different episode, featuring the plot of how the gun that was used in the Wayne's murders was built and was passed from hand to hand during years until it arrived in Joe Chill's hands in that terrible night that he killed Thomas and Martha Wayne. The story would be actually kind of a montage of this gun passing from hand to hand until arriving in Chill's hands. Since the discovery of the metal that was used to build it, then being passed from hand to hand, like I said, during many years, even passing by the hands of none other than Jack Napier, which in the universe of Batman the Animated Series is the real name of the Joker, just like in the 89's movie. And this concept actually reminded me of a montage of that movie called The Lord of War, a great movie with Nicolas Cage, that the beginning of the movie is this montage of a bullet being constructed until arriving at a gun and being shot to end up in a very tragic destiny. And the episode wouldn't end with the Wayne's murder. In fact, it would end in the present time of the show with Bruce Wayne retrieving the gun, melting it, and using as a inscription in the tombstone of his parents. Yes, kids, a very dark and edgy episode that could be produced, but of course it wasn't, right? Why would it be? The ratings at the time would never let something like this fly. It could be a great and legendary episode in terms of storytelling, but I also agree that it doesn't really fit the tone of that series. Even though Batman the Animated Series was famous for featuring guns for the first time in a cartoon for kids. Real guns, not guns with lasers from G.I. Joe, for example. Anyway, but the best Unmade episode, in my opinion, and this one was not even written in a script, is the idea of Batman Vampire, that according to Bruce Timm, it could have been a two-parter episode in the series, and it would feature exactly this, a character from the DC lore called Nocturna, or Natalia Knight, would be portrayed in the show as a vampire that was going to bite Batman in the neck to turn him into a vampire so that they both could marry and live an eternal life. And I absolutely love this idea. I love when we have this kind of different concepts where Batman is on the edge of becoming a monster or a villain. So the two-parter would follow as this, with Batman having to deal with the transformation into a vampire, the symptoms of the vampirism like having his skin burned by the sunlight, his desire for blood that would make him actually want to bite Alfred at some moment, and the whole plot would take him into a journey of finding a cure for his disease and going back to be a human, which would end up in a meeting between him and the Man-Bat, or actually Dr. Kirk Langstrom, one of my favorite Batman villains. And that is because Dr. Langstrom would be the only one able to create some serum or antidote to make him return to be human. Why this was never produced? Again, because the producers thought, no way, Batman would never become a vampire in this show. No blood, no Batman wanting to bite people or becoming a monster, no way. But of course, the concept was used many years later in another great animated show called Batman the Brave and the Bold. I love this show, by the way. And the story is kinda similar because in the beginning of the episode, we have Batman and Etrigan, the demon, chasing a vampire called Dala that just beat Batman, and he would return to the Justice Tower, the space station of the Justice League, and become a vampire there, terrorizing the other heroes of the Justice League, including the Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, Martian Manhunter, and others. It's a very cool episode, but that also has a comedic tone, of course, with Batman using his powers to terrify the other heroes, like becoming an actual bat or inviting them for a sinister dinner. It's very cool. At the end of the episode, Martian Manhunter finds a solution to return Batman to the human condition, which is kind of forced, but interesting at the same time. And let's not forget that Batman actually faced a vampire in animation in the long feature of the animated series The Batman with Batman vs. Dracula. It's a movie that I'm considering talking about in the future. It's very fun, not the best Batman animated feature, but it's pretty fun and unique for what it is. And this is it, guys, some of the Unmade Batman the Animated Series episodes. I believe some of these dark and edgy ideas could be used in the new show Batman the Caped Crusader, but we have to wait and see. Until then, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you are liking the content of BATGUS. That's it for now. See you in the next Bat video, and bye bye.